Welcome back to the Black Table on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Greg Carr. In the first of his possible 2 terms as United States president, Joe Biden has nominated to the federal bench more nominees than any president in recent memory. In fact, it's going back quite some time between Ronald Reagan and having confirmed John F. Kennedy. As of mid-February, his 82 nominees, 46 have been confirmed, and of those 46 in what is called the Article 3 courts, the federal courts, 14 have been confirmed to the circuit courts of appeals, and 32 have been confirmed to the district courts. And of those 46 combined, 11 have been Black women, a quarter Black women, prior to the Biden administration. Only 70 of the 3,843 federal judges to serve in the history of the United States of America, 2%, or a little less than 2%, have been Black women. Today, we talk about the pledge that Joe Biden is fulfilling by nominating a Black woman to the Supreme Court of the United States of America. And we're going to do that today with 2 Black women, 2 academics, 2 professors, 2 women who hold law degrees and who are not only eminently qualified to have this conversation, but will probably change the way we think about the federal judiciary in general, not just Black women or Black people. We're joined today by the director of Howard University's Graduate Women's Studies Certificate Program, Dr. Valethia Watkins, who also holds a JD from The Ohio State University, and Professor Angela Porter, who is a fellow at Georgetown Law Center and has just been appointed to the faculty of the American University School of Law. And she's developing a new field of law called Africana Legal Studies. So welcome, Valethia. Welcome, Angela, to the Black Table.
Thank you. Good to be here. Good to see both of you guys.
With pleasure. And those of you who are regular watchers of the Black Table know that Valethia is part of our HBCU Master Teachers Regular Roundtable. And we are inviting Professor Porter to join that conversation because she is a double graduate of HBCU, Howard University, and Howard University School of Law, where she was the editor of the Howard Law Journal. Take that, Ted Cruz, for qualifications. Can you spell it, Ted? Can you spell it? Okay, no, I'm sorry. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Let's get right down to the point with a kind of point of entry questions for both of you. What's the significance of this Biden pledge, and what is the significance of having a Black woman on the Supreme Court? And I'm just going to hold out the fact that even though Sotomayor speaks Spanish, I always say that I consider her Black in part because she came from Puerto Rico. But anyway, either of you can take that first. I see Angie nodding vigorously, so maybe you want to start and then toss to Valethia.
No, I'm deferring to Valethia first.
Oh, okay. Well, go ahead, Professor Watkins.
Well, we definitely claim Justice Sotomayor as one of our own, having that broad African community consciousness and recognizing our common humanity. Mm-hmm. So she's definitely representing the voiceless and justice in a step in the right direction. But I think this nomination is important because of what it represents. It's beyond being symbolic. This should have happened last century, if not sooner. You're looking at a court that has had 115 persons as justices, and 108 have been white men. And so when we talk about what this moment represents, it kind of, speaking with people in our community, it's like whiplash in a certain way, because on the one hand, you see this is the breaking down of another barrier. You see that this is a step in the right direction towards fundamental fairness. You see that this is a recognition that this nominee is not going to be the very first person that African people who have produced that would be supremely qualified, but is just at a moment in time where history calls her forth and the stars align. There's an alignment for this long fight for justice that gives her the opportunity to step in and represent so many shoulders she's going to stand on. I'm thinking about people like Constance Baker Motley, the first Black woman appointed to the federal bench.
And just so people know, that's in our lifetimes. Was it like 1966?
1966.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about people like Marianne Shad Carey and Charlotte E. Ray, some of the first Black women graduates of law school. I'm thinking about people like Pauli Murray, who is an important lawyer, an important writer, thinker, giving us the concept of Jane Crow. I'm thinking about Barbara Jordan.
Well, before we go on, the first three you named all graduated from Howard, didn't they?
They did.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that as a Howard homer. I'm saying that to illustrate the point that often when we think about qualifications, the only place Black people could go to school for the law school were those Black colleges, and the people who killed Jim Crow came out of. So the very people they praise came from the schools now that people might think are a little less than qualified. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
We need that clarification. But it's just to say that she's going to be standing on the shoulders of giants, and that we have produced excellence all throughout our history. But this is just the first opportunity that this person is going to have to be at the table, be in the room where it happens, to represent this long struggle. And
you also mentioned Barbara Jordan. You mind saying a word, because some people may not know Barbara Jordan. You're about to talk about her a little bit.
Yeah, Barbara Jordan is a major African-American lawyer, politician, educator coming out of Texas, one of the first Black women or Black person elected since Reconstruction out of Texas. But she gave a very memorable, speaking of the times we're in, very powerful speech during the Nixon impeachment hearings. And a very powerful speech, that was 1974, and a very powerful speech at the Democratic National Convention in 1976. But just a true champion for our community and standing up for what's right. So a politician in Congress, but a lawyer, just a very brilliant thinker.
I should ask both of you, and then maybe Angela, if you jump in here as well. Do you have to be a lawyer to sit on the Supreme Court?
No.
What? Wait, breaking news? Wait a minute. You don't have, because every one of those women you named were lawyers, but there have been non-lawyers on the court?
There have been non-lawyers on the court. One of the most revered chief justices in history, John Marshall, took a couple of law classes or something. I mean, of course.
The Chief Justice Marshall was not
a lawyer. And I think, even into the 20th century, you have, I think James Burns was one who didn't graduate from high school. I mean, There's no requirement.
We're talking about real affirmative action, otherwise known as whiteness.
Right.
I didn't be clear. I was just trying to. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. What you think, Angie? I mean, given what Valethia has laid out, and everybody you named was eminently qualified, I'm wondering if any of those women could even be nominated, much less appointed to the Supreme Court in 2022. I mean, what's the significance, do you think?
Well, first, let me just say I'm happy to be here among you two giants on the Black table. I'm so excited. So thank you. I just want to say that before I go further. I totally agree with Dr. Watkins, who I might, if you don't mind, call Valethia during this broadcast.
Of course.
Because that's my friend. We talk a lot. We talk ad nauseum about these things just on a first name basis. So I'm going to break protocol a little bit and call her Valethia. But I totally agree. I think Justice Sotomayor, for all intents and purposes, not only with what you described, Greg, but in her decision making and how she aligns on the court, she holds up under Black scrutiny for us. So Justice Sotomayor is our champion. A quick story about her. I was an undergrad at my graduation behind, if y'all know Howard's campus, behind behind the football field, going out to the yard, coming through Blackburn, and she was there. And I'm just a, college graduate, and I said, very unprofessionally, "Hey, Sonia." And she swirled around and said, "Hey," without
South Bronx. No question.
Yeah, to just a stranger, to this college kid calling her by her first name. This is right after she got on the court. So
That reminds me when she came to Howard Law School, remember? And she was delayed getting to the auditorium because she stopped to take a picture with everybody. And as we know, there are so many people on the staff at Howard who are from Spanish-speaking communities. And she took a picture with every last one of them. And she would not let her detail or anybody in that building rush her. So you're absolutely right. She does speak to the spirit. And of course, her decision making, all it takes is a read of her opinions to see that she definitely passes the black.
Exactly. Her opinions, her dissents, she's speaking for us. And so she is definitely one we can count among the justices, the women justices, and the justices who are not white, who are really working for the good of our community, for our people. But I do think that, go ahead.
No. Go ahead. And then when you finish, then we'll take a break and come back and get into a deep dive of some of these leading nominees. But please make your point, by all means, please.
I think that the value that this justice who will be appointed will be somewhat of that same Sotomayor-esque value, as in they will have the opportunity to be bold and write some very powerful opinions, whether those are concurring or dissenting opinions. We're on a 6-3 court right now, thanks to the last several years and some decision making. That means there's a supermajority for the conservative-leaning court justices. So this person is not immediately going to come in as a practical matter and change the thrust of the court. But the question is, will they be bold enough to put some things on paper into the flow of time that can benefit us in the future generations? And by us, I mean our community, our people, Black people. We are at the Black table. So that's what I'm talking about.
No question. That's very powerful, in fact. And you all make note of that. Just because you don't win an opinion doesn't mean that you won't have the long-term impact. That those dissents are very important. So we're going to take a break here. We're going to pause for a moment. And when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into who the candidates are for this open seat on the Supreme Court with Professor Valencia Watkins and Professor Angela Porter. I'm Greg Carr. We're at the Black Table. Back in a moment.
Impacted by the culture, whether we know it or not. From politics to music and entertainment, it's a huge part of our lives, and we're going to talk about it every day right here on The Culture with me, Faraji Muhammad, only on the Black Star Network.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punches!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay Black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
Welcome back to the Black Table. I'm Greg Carr, joined by Professor Valencia Watkins and Professor Angela Porter. We're talking Supreme Court, we're talking federal judiciary, we're talking Constitution, and we're talking Black women. And all those things have converged as Joe Biden has announced that he will indeed nominate a Black woman to sit on the Supreme Court of the United States of America. So when we paused, we were talking about the significance of this appointment. And so we're going to look a little deeper. Biden has announced that he's whittled the list down to 4 for exacting scrutiny. And those 4 include Judge Michelle Childs, who's on federal district court in Columbia, South Carolina. She'd actually been nominated to the DC Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit. And of course, they withdrew that nomination because she's being considered for the Supreme Court. On the California Supreme Court, we have Justice Leandra Kruger. She would be the youngest justice on the court if she's the nominee and appointed. The sister whose name we probably heard the most over the last couple of years is a sister who is now on the Court of Appeals, DC Circuit, and that is, of course, Ketanji Brown Jackson, who we'll talk about. And there's also been some talk around Judge Wilhelmina Mimi Wright, who was on federal district court in Minnesota, first Black woman to join the Minnesota Supreme Court. So Professors Watkins and Porter, if you all rejoin, anybody want to take a pass at any of those four names that we've heard discussed? I haven't heard Judge Wright as much, so maybe we can start with her. I don't know if either of you know her, so
I guess I'll go. I do know her. Actually.
You know her?
Yes.
Know her. Unlike Mariah Carey, I don't know her. No.
I don't know her.
Go ahead. Say something about Judge Mimi Wright.
I shouldn't say much. No. Of course not.
I gotta say less. No question. But is there any impression when you hear that name come up on the list?
Well, I'll keep it to the things that folks can see and read about. But having practiced in Minnesota, having clerked in federal court in Minnesota, the bar is small. The community of Black attorneys is small. So I think most Minnesota practitioners know and really respect Judge Wilhelmina Mimi Wright. One thing I'll say about her is she has been a judge at all levels of the state court system in Minnesota. So that is like a deep sense of experience on the judiciary, more than, and we can talk about this with all of these shortlist people, but they have more experience judging than many of the justices on the Supreme Court.
Like there's a long article in the recent New Yorker, on the recent New York article on Amy Comey Barrett, who of course served at many levels as a judge. No. Okay, I'm sorry. We're going to talk qualifications later. Ted Cruz, Josh Harley. We're going to talk young Josh Harley. We're going to talk qualifications later. So you're saying Judge Wright has served at every level?
Yes. And
is that valuable? Is that something you want to look for in a Supreme Court justice?
I think absolutely. Absolutely, because just as a little bit of background, so the court systems have their trial level, their intermediate appellate level, and then each state has its Supreme Court. These courts do different things. So the trial level is what most people think about when they think about court, when they're watching lawyer shows, Law and Order. That's where trials happen. That's where there are juries. That's where you see the parties come in. So the defendant is there, or the injured person is in the courtroom. People are watching in the back of the courtroom. The appellate level and the Supreme Court level, they are very different. They are hearing cases that were decided at the trial level. So it's not this drama of a trial at those places. These judges at the appellate level, and the Supreme Court is technically considered an appellate court as well. Those two courts, those judges are looking at briefs. They are dealing more with attorneys making arguments. They don't have juries. And so their way of thinking is a little different too. They're thinking about, high, lofty legal concepts, previous cases, precedent, constitutional issues. At the state court level, they're thinking about the state constitutions. So they're really in this more like academic space. So my point is, for a judge like, not only like Judge Wright, but you have some other judges who are, being looked at on the short list, who have experience at both the trial and the appellate level. That just shows they have a broader range of experience. They have different skills. Different parts of their brain have been working as judges.
I feel like a lot of people here at the table today are getting perhaps their first peek at very basic things that need to be considered when we start talking about judicial decision making. And then this is very valuable, Professor Ford. Professor Watkins, Valethia, you want to pick from the list? If these are the four in the room, anybody you want to start with as we begin our conversation? People get familiar with some of these names.
Harkening back to your point about qualifications, if one looks at the Constitution, there is no age qualification, education qualification, or, even being native born. There have been foreigners that have sat on the court. Wow. So, looking in this modern moment when the former president that was recently in office, when he stocked the federal bench or the courts recently, he made a point to pack the court, not only with conservatives, but very, very young conservatives. So it seems odd to say when you talk about a context of age discrimination, that age is going to be a major consideration because, his pick of Amy Coney Barrett being 48, she's 50 now. Kavanaugh is 56. Neil Gorsuch is 54. So when you look on the conservative side of the court, they're very young in comparison to Breyer being 83, Kagan being 61, and Sotomayor being 67. So I think age is going to be a factor. And when we look at that, we see Candace Jackson's Akinwumi is 43 years old. Kruger is 45. I think Ketanji Brown Jackson, 51, is just on the other shade. It seems odd to be looking at people's age at 55 is old, right, from our perspective.
No question.
But I think also people have advocated, and I look at, people talk about Ketanji Brown Jackson as a leading contender. People have argued for the point that we need not just personal diversity, but professional diversity. So I think what is important in this pool of candidates, that we have people that have been public defenders. And public defenders are severely underrepresented on the federal bench.
And Brown Jackson was a public defender at one point.
Yes, Brown Jackson was a federal public defender, and so has Candace Jackson Akinwumi been a public defender. And that professional experience of working with so-called indigent people who cannot afford attorneys, who need representation, being on the other side, because there's a tendency to push just prosecutors, to push people who are just pro-corporate. And so having people who have defended workers, who have defended the interests of the poor, the working class, and those criminal defendants who could not afford lawyers, brings a professional diversity and a perspective that is important. So this is just not about, the politics of the body. This is about, the wide range of experiences. And that's been the problem with the court, the narrow casting to the Harvard, Yale. And even though many of these women represent those schools, you do have some people in the pool like Judge J. Michelle Childs, who went to a state school, University of South Carolina. And she, I would say we have two people with Detroit connections that's important, J. Michelle Childs and Tiffany Cunningham. She's in the running. And you may know that Tiffany Cunningham is the first Black woman to sit on the federal circuit, which is a court that focuses on patent. So she has chemical engineering undergraduate degree from MIT.
Right. And people don't often recognize that it isn't just the Court of Appeals. It isn't just the district court, but it's also in Article 3 of those other courts, those administrative law courts. So it's important to note. And by the way, those of you who might not have known this, Professor Watkins, Dr. Watkins is a graduate of the University of Michigan and from Detroit. So she had to get her little, Detroit shout out in there. I love that we talking about these Black women. We're gonna pause here for another break. And when we resume, we're going to continue in this conversation around these Black women who are being vetted for a seat on the Supreme Court. We'll continue the conversation on the other side of our break. This is the Black Table on the Black Star Network. Back in a moment.
Don't you think it's time to get wealthy? I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show on the Black Star Network focuses on the things your financial advisor or bank isn't telling you. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
We're back at the Black Table, joined by Professors Angela Porter and Professors Valeethia Watkins. When we left, Professor Watkins, you were making several points about diversity and not just racial diversity, but experiential diversity. And Professor Porter, as you were talking about the nature of judging and how it's probably better to have somebody who is familiar with all levels. But before we go to the some of the other names on the list, though, you mentioned, Professor Watkins, that Judge Brown Jackson, who's on the Court of Appeals here in D.C., had worked as a public defender, but isn't it more? It's more complicated than that, right? I mean, many of these women have worked in private practice, and they haven't always been on the side of the angels, right? We hear some of the critics, perhaps. I hate to use the left-right example on the scale, but either of you have anything to say about some of the folks who may criticize some of these judges by saying perhaps they might be a conservative or more conservative than perhaps we would think would be associated with a Black person on the bench on the Supreme Court? Professor Porter, you have something?
Oh, the criticism is overly simplified. It's overly simplistic. First, I want to say all of the top four, so Ketanji Brown Jackson, Leandra Kruger, Michelle Childs, and Mimi Wright, they've all worked for big law firms. They've all. It's kind of hard
to avoid working for a big law firm if you're on a list like this. Is that what you all are saying?
I think for many attorneys, it's sort of a rite of passage, I was told once upon a time. I mean, I worked for a large law firm. And so, just that fact alone is not enough to disqualify any of these candidates in our minds from the standpoint of our people. I mean, Jackson worked at Morrison Forrester. I mean, these are huge. MoFo is known as. These are huge firms. Kruger worked for Jenner and Block. That's where she met her husband. MoFo, yeah. She worked at Wilmer Hale. Michelle Childs. I forget which firm she was at. I don't know. Maybe y'all have it.
And Childs, to your point, Valeethia, is one of the few on this list that didn't go to an Ivy or Ivy adjacent school, right? University of South Carolina. I mean, people are saying, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, perhaps that Childs is the one that Jim Clyburn is pushing hard, kind of like as payback for dragging Joe Biden across the finish line. But anyway, to be president. But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you. So all the firms you're naming, folks who practice law would immediately recognize those names. Those are the behemoths. Okay.
Those are the behemoth firms. And just so people know, because this isn't really well known if you're not practicing law, but all of these firms, big firms, are expensive. And so their clients are clients that can afford them, meaning they are companies, they're corporations. So it's not enough to just say Michelle Childs worked at a firm. And it's also not enough to say she worked in the labor and employment area of a law firm. I think she's got a little scrutiny for that, saying, oh, she represents the Goliath in the typical case against the little guy who's suing for discrimination. That's also oversimplified. So at these big firms, you have various practice areas that people choose to focus on their work on, and labor and employment, known as L&E, is a popular choice. I would argue a popular choice for Black attorneys.
Interesting. Oh, so when you were in school, and this wouldn't go, I assume, just for Harvard. Of course, for Harvard, because they trying to run the show, but not just for Howard, but Texas Southern, FAM, North Carolina Central, the Black law schools. In other words, are you saying perhaps students are encouraged to aspire to those type of jobs?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you have any student debt, there are a lot of attorneys who say, I need to work at a firm to pay my student debt. So I don't know about the student debt of any of these potential nominees, but to the extent they have student loan debt,
I tell you who does, the Federal Bureau of Investigation at this point. Shout out to Justice Kavanaugh, whose finances still appear very opaque. But anyway, continue.
But you go to these firms as a Black attorney and you're like, what area am I going to practice in that actually feels meaningful to me? Is it going to be tax? Is it going to be the corporate area? Is it going to be, regulatory affairs? I worked in the trial group of the firm where I worked, but a lot of people went to L&E, labor and employment, because you're actually dealing with the topic of discrimination, immigration, things that you care about. And yes, you may have the case occasionally for a client where you were representing a client who allegedly did something that was running afoul of anti-discrimination law. Two things I want to point out there. On balance, you're going to have those cases. You're also going to have cases where you advise those clients on how to be better so that they avoid liability. So I'm saying it's not a far cry, and I've read some of her former colleagues have said this. It's not a far cry to say J. Michelle Childs was doing the good work in labor and employment as well by advising employers how not to discriminate so that they won't get sued. So that's the first note.
That's very interesting. Let's think about that even in the context. Let's bring another of the sisters into the conversation, because we won't know until the pick is made, obviously. But this younger sister out there on the California Supreme Court, Leandra Kruger. There's been a lot of conversations. She's argued before SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, a number of times. She'd be the youngest justice on the court. Now, of course, she goes back to Yale. She was the editor-in-chief of the Yale Law Journal. Either you have any perspective on Justice Kruger?
Well, going back to what you were saying, so she's argued 12 cases before the Supreme Court. And I think that's the largest number. If you go back to Baker Motley, she argued 10. Now, Motley won 9 of the 10. So I'm not sure how many Kruger won, but I think, again, they're going to emphasize age. They're going to emphasize her role as having been before the Supreme Court. They're going to emphasize the fact that she clerked for Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens. And so all of that is going to be that role, that experience in the federal, working for the Solicitor General's office, that kind of trial experience is going to be important. And sitting on the California State Supreme Court, that also gives her that kind of foundational experience of that kind of cerebral, looking at cerebral type issues. So that's going to play in her favor. And again, I can't keep emphasizing age is more than a number in this context.
Mm-hmm. Even though we know typically women live longer than men. And I'm going to ask you all, I'll save that for a minute. I'll talk about Clarence Thomas a little bit, because and maybe even the politics of this. But in terms of Justice Kruger as well, she did clerk for Supreme Court Justice. Is that important, Professor Porter? I know that didn't Brown Jackson clerk for Breyer, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, we certainly see with Gorsuch and those cats. And I mean, the talk was that Gorsuch was in line in part because he could nudge Kennedy to retire and free that seat up. So I don't know.
Yeah, because he was Kennedy's clerk.
He clerked for Kennedy, right? So I mean, this is inside baseball for a lot of people. But is clerking for a justice of the court something that gives anybody a leg up?
Absolutely, yeah. And I just want to repeat a couple of things that Valithia mentioned. Yes, she is the first, or she as a Black woman, she's argued more cases on the Supreme Court, Leandra Kruger, than any other Black woman in history. So as you mentioned, Constance Baker Motley, Leandra Kruger argued 12 cases and did win most of those before the court. So I just wanted to add that. Being a Supreme Court clerk is definitely a leg up. I mean, that is a rare experience. I think all of these, I checked, I think the top 4 who we're talking about have all clerked at the federal level, which is, a prestigious thing. But also the Supreme Court clerkship experience is this rare and very highly regarded experiential thing. So As you mentioned, Ketanji Brown Jackson clerked for Breyer. Leandra Kruger clerked for Stevens. I think they both clerked for highly regarded appellate court judges. Kruger clerked for Judge Tatel at the DC Circuit. So she also has DC Circuit experience. Mimi Wright clerked for Damon Keith. I think that's the only Black judge on this list that we've noted.
The legendary
judge. Highly regarded. So each of these judges have, especially the more seasoned judges, have these clerk armies, they call them. This army of former clerks. And that group of people tend to be influential people in the legal world.
Well, they tossed Melissa Murray in the running too. We don't know. She's maybe not in the top consideration, but she clerked for Justice Sotomayor when she was on the circuit court.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, particularly since Sotomayor said as she was appointed that she wanted to diversify the clerks.
Right. But, but again, I mean, that's the double-edged sword, because on the one level, on the criteria they say they respect and all the other judges have had, we have these women who have that experience. But also the double-edged sword is narrow casting. It's the same, picking only people from Harvard and Yale, picking only people who have clerked. And we know the vast majority of those justices. I think what was startling when we looked at RBG's funeral service and they had the former clerks, just how few Black or minority clerks she did not have.
How about that?
And so if we buy into that criteria, they meet that criteria. Right. So whatever standard you set, they meet, and they meet the standard of the Constitution. But at the same time, this needs to be diversified, and we need to look for a broader range of experiences. But in this first one, I understand what is taking place. But the fact that this society has limited this highest bench to just that narrow set of criteria is to guarantee it becomes a proxy for white men in some respect, because you have to have that network and that connection when there's so much talent is not concentrated to those groups in those schools. We know that every day. I'm looking at two people who could go sit on the court right now.
As am I. And
that's you.
And we're all looking
Carr
at three
and
people.
Porter could be on the court right now.
Right. But who would never aspire to be to the court, which is to be on that court.
Right. But who have the intellect, the brilliance, the sense of justice and fairness right now. And so we are impoverished as a nation, just staying with the same old criteria, which is used to exclude. It's proxy criteria. But the point is they meet that standard of excellence, and therefore they should be at that table. And and you think about Cheryl Eiffel in the conversation too. Again, these may be long shots, but she would be in the tradition of Thurgood Marshall, being the head of the NAACP Legal and Education Defense Fund, and that kind of advocacy for voting rights. And boy, is that insight and expertise
in fact,
has never been needed. More so than now.
When we come back on the other side, we'll take our final break. We'll come back. We're going to look at some of these criticisms, which I think both of you have already debunked as unwarranted, about qualifications tied to these names or to Black women in general. Your Klanhood is showing those of you in the Senate with this foolishness. But anyway, we'll get to those Klansmen in a minute, Klan adjacent folk. When we come back to the Black Table, back in a moment.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
Welcome back to the Black Table. We're talking Supreme Court, Black women, constitutional law, the federal judiciary, with Professor Valethia Watkins, Director of the Graduate Women's Studies Certificate Program at Howard University, and Professor Angela Porter, Research Fellow, Georgetown University, and incoming faculty at the American University School of Law. Angela, you were about to, I think, make a point when we jumped in. I saw you kind of nod. Go right ahead, and then we'll get into some of this criticism stuff.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up where Valethia left off, talking about, the narrow self-replicating nature of this group of 9 people deciding the fate of many of us. And I think this goes back to your first question, Greg, related to the impact of the court. I mean, the court impacts our daily lives and our quotidian sense of reality very much, more than people know. And once you start paying attention is when you know. I mean, you can't see it if you don't know. So I would recommend people really start looking at the decision-making that's going on in the Supreme Court, because it has real life, everyday effects. So it's really important to me, as someone very familiar with legal culture, to read between the lines and really go to the next level of examining who can help us from that post. Valethia really hit on something with the educational background, with the, this clerkship profile. I mean, aspiring justices, they are well-behaved individuals. And that's not original. I'm getting that from Bruce Wright's book, Black Robes, White Justice.
Bruce Wright, Judge Bruce Wright, who could have sat on the bench. Well, they are well-behaved, unless, of course, you're Brett Kavanaugh and have a very powerful frame.
Well, yes. He's talking about Black judges. He's saying, you are in the judiciary, you are well-behaved. These are people from well-behaved society. These are not radical.
It's so funny you mentioned that, because I was actually working for Cheryl Eiffel and the lawyers at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund when I read Black Robes, White Justice that summer. I was in New York, 1989. And of course, Valethia, you'll remember this. We were both in law school at the time watching Clarence Thomas's confirmation hearing. So when you talk about well-behaved Black justices, shout out to Anita Hill and all those Black women who testified to say that he wasn't that well-behaved. Perhaps we can even look at this appointment, since Joe Biden was the chair of judiciary at that time, and we have him to thank in part for Clarence Thomas, as a course correction on his part. I mean, this question of well-behaved justice. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, my point being that we have to look beyond sort of the cookie cutter measures that people have set themselves up for. And that's why I want to give an extra shout out to Michelle Childs. I think it's a red herring to take her off the table because of, Clyburn or because of her firm experience. I really think that is an intentional distraction. And I think that she shows some promise, not only because she had, and when I talk about promise, I'm talking about promise for us, okay? I've shifted orientation. I'm not talking about who's gonna be the best justice, according to what the law says. I'm talking about for us. She shows a lot of promise to help our people because, one, her experience, her personal experience. I mean, this is something that was big with Sotomayor. Childs is coming from Detroit. Her father was a police officer who died, when she was a teenager. She moves to South Carolina, attends those state schools, I think University of South Florida for undergrad, University of South Carolina for law school, got 2 master's degrees, but went to Duke at some point, but she's in these schools, presumably interacting with people of various walks of life. I don't want to take away from the Ivy League school experience of the other potential nominees, but I'm hitting on something that Valethia mentioned, which is that type of diversity. We got 9 people sitting on this court. So can one of them have this other experience with people? And another thing I'll say is Judge Childs been judging for 12 plus years. I think she worked I think that 12 is her federal court judging experience. So I saw one of her opinions was about voting rights in 2020 in South Carolina. And she was on the right side of that.
Do you think people will hold that against? I mean, I'm just thinking now about the people who are already starting to emerge, the usual suspects, the Cruzes and others, but are saying that it's insulting to say that you're nominating a black woman. I mean, Ted Cruz said that. Or will they look at those opinions? Obviously, they're going to look at anything they can get. Are those going to be scrutinized?
Everything is on the table. When you're judged, they look back to like age 16 of what you did, and everything is scrutinized. It's the most intense scrutiny in this process. But my point I was making with the voting rights thing is, I mean, yeah, they gonna think what they're gonna think. Okay. We should fully expect that the Republicans are going to do what they do. That's what they do. For our people, we should pay attention to those decisions she made that help us. That voting rights decision in 2020 was absolutely what you want a judge to say, which is that we shouldn't be erecting procedural barriers for absentee voting, for example. Judge Child said that. She's given us a lot of fodder with which to judge how she might be. Another thing I saw she is known for, one of her clerks came out and said, when indigent, that is people who can't afford legal representation, indigent plaintiffs or inmates are writing letters to the court, she made sure that they responded to every single letter explaining how the process works for those unrepresented parties. And these are the things, these are the extracurricular things we need to pay attention to, because all the legal stuff we can come up with justifications for. Having a bad decision, having a bad client, we can come up with justifications for. But what are these judges doing outside, beyond, in their free time? To me, that speaks volumes.
So then, as we kind of wind up, thoughts that you have on, how this process might unfold. Let's say it's Child. What we see with the Biden nominees so far to the federal bench, particularly at the circuit court level, there haven't been nominees in states where the Republicans have the Senate seats. I mean, they've tried to avoid that, but this is unavoidable. Everybody's got to vote. I'm wondering if either of you think that any of these nominees could pick off any white nationalist party votes, any Republican votes. If it's Child's, of course, both Lindsey Graham and Tim Scott, mission accomplished Tim Scott, have come out and kind of given her a thumbs up endorsement. Not that they vote for her, but I'm wondering if any of you all think that any of this kind of 50-50 or 50-49 with this senator, I think New Mexico just had a stroke, hope his speedy recovery. Do you think that this could be rocky, stormy, no matter who Biden nominates, given these, these folks kind of recalcitrant at this point? Valeetha, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think the congresswomen who just sent a letter, Cori Bush and the other 14 Black women in Congress that sent a letter to Biden, pointed out a key fact that it is very significant that there is not one Black woman in the United States Senate at this moment with a seat to vote on the first potential nominee that it's going to be a Black woman. With regards to picking off one of the white nationalists, let's understand what's going on. First, let's put it in the context of their court packing scheme. That is what this toxic attack, this smear campaign on this particular woman who has not been named, but yet they full-throated attacked in a toxic attack. That we should start that conversation off with, we don't give a damn about what they think. Secondly, the fact that they have been engaged in a court packing scheme that allowed them to change the rules, the norms, deny a Democratic president a seat, and then stole 2 seats. So that they don't want to talk about that. They want to control the narrative, and they want the narrative on their terms of debate. And so corporate media has said this point. They made this point. They said that the GOP is split over how to handle this nomination. I doubt that's the case. They are speaking out of both sides of their mouth. They're taking a 2-pronged attack. They're going full-throated white nationalists to rally their base. They have the election of 2022 and 2024 at the forefront of their minds, and they are doing everything they can to rally their base around resentment and the politics of polarization and grievance, white racial resentment. And then the other part of the strategy is to dangle this bipartisan carrot again that only Democrats are held to. The former president could do everything he promised to do for his base and never seek any consultation with the other side. But we keep getting this dangling of bipartisanship, which is often a strategy to string out things and then it's like Charlie Brown removing the football each time. So what they're dangling on one level is like, okay, how do we read Graham's promising potentially up to 10? I thought at first he was talking about just him and Tim Scott, but he's like, if you pick the person we want, so they just want a hand in selecting the person with no guarantee they're going to give those votes. So they're going to have a hand. They want a hand. They want to pick who they want to pick. And then they're going to do this like they did that bipartisan, that Build Back Better thing. You'll be by yourself. So they're playing both sides against the middle. They are dangling this potential support in order to have a seat at the table and picking who the ultimate nominee would be, which would be somebody that's more palatable to them. But on the other hand, there are a few in the running that did receive at least 3 Republican votes during their nomination process. But this is a different ball game.
Different ball game. Yeah, I mean, in the minute we have left, you introduced a very shocking twist. This nomination, any nomination, could be in trouble. So, I mean, how do you all see this playing out? I mean, and again, it doesn't change the number in the court, but in the minute we have left, any thoughts on, what happens with this nomination? And then looking forward, perhaps, when maybe Justice Thomas comes off in the next couple of years, how important is this to the electoral strategy of the Democrats in 22 and 24, this nomination?
Well, one quick thing I would say is look at the confirmations. I mean, the strategic chess move right now is to make sure that they get somebody confirmed before November, before this can really go askew politically. So this is a political strategy. The people who have been confirmed are Ketanji Brown Jackson. It is not Leandra Kruger. She did not have to get confirmed by the Senate to become Justice of the California Supreme Court, the most innovative state court in the country, but she didn't have to get confirmed. Childs did as a district court judge, and so did Mimi Wright. So they're looking for people who they can push through with minimal impediments. I would say the fact that the Republicans said they would throw in support for Childs shouldn't make us view her with suspicion. I just would leave by raising the specter. An example of Earl Warren, who the Republicans thought was going to be their justice.
Yes.
And who was not.
They're not going to make that mistake again. They're not going to make that mistake again. In fact, we're going to pause for today. And as everyone has experienced again, this is why at the Black Table, we only invite the best. This has been a wonderful conversation, far too short, which means we're going to continue this. I expect we're going to have this conversation more than once. We're going to have to. Professor Porter, Professor Watkins, thank you for coming to the Black Table, and we look forward to having a conversation with you again in the near future.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
With great pleasure. With great pleasure. With great pleasure. So when we come back in a moment, the Black Table, we're going to clear the table and reset it for our next session. Back in a moment. time to be smart.
Roland Martin's doing this every day.
Oh, no punching!
Thank you, Roland Martin, for always giving voice to the issues.
Look for Roland Martin in the whirlwind, to quote Marcus Garvey again.
The video looks phenomenal, so I'm really excited to see it on my big screen.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
I got to defer to the brilliance of Dr. Carr and to the brilliance of the Black Star Network.
I am rolling with Roland all the way.
Honored to be on a show that you own. A Black man owns the show.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
I'm real revolutionary right now. Roland was amazing on that.
Stay black. I love y'all.
I can't commend you enough about this platform that you've created for us to be able to share who we are, what we're doing in the world, and the impact that we're having.
Let's be smart. Bring your eyeballs home.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared. You dig?
As we prepare to clear the table and prepare for our next time together, we're reminded, because of this conversation, of the words of the great Charles Hamilton Houston. Charlie Houston, the former vice dean of Howard University School of Law, which was known as the West Point of the Civil Rights Movement. Charles Hamilton Houston, the man who acquired the moniker of the man that killed Jim Crow. Charles Houston, the trainer of Thurgood Marshall, the man who helped train Oliver Hill and Spotswood Robinson and so many others that came out of Howard Law. Pauli Murray, who came out of Howard Law. In other words, a whole lot of qualified people who could have been sitting on the Supreme Court of the United States in a different kind of country. It was Charles Hamilton Houston who famously said that a lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite. If that were the standard by which Supreme Court justices were nominated and confirmed, how many of the current justices on the Supreme Court would be sitting there today? With the table cleared and reset, we will see everyone again soon, next Friday, on the Black Table. I'm Greg Carr, the Black Star Network. Talk to you soon.